National Nancy's, the fourth in the Alex Reynolds Mysteries. Author Fred Hunter, St. Martin's Press, New York, 2000. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 6. Our investigation was temporarily sidelined by the fact that there was no place to pursue it. We got a call Monday morning telling us that Clark's new office would open on Wednesday in a building on Wabash on the south side of the Loop. So on Monday and Tuesday I engaged in some anxious mopping, while Peter worked at his day job, and Mother flitted around the house like a latent, lovesick Joanna Lumley, which I tried very hard to ignore. Somehow, Simon managed to find the time in between seminars to take her to lunch and dinner both days. Although I still had my suspicions about him, his attentions to Mother were so obvious that I had to accept that his intentions were romantic rather than anarchist. However much I would have preferred the later. The only news on the bombing over those 2 days, according to the media, was that there was no news. Only the mounting concern that it had been the work of some terrorist group, with the usual amount of verbal garment rending over how this might be the beginning of the kind of terrorism so familiar overseas, coming to our native shores. Controversy raged over Reverend Nate Albertson's remarks, which some felt had implied that he had some sort of inside information about the bombing. He held another press conference in which he expressed his outrage that the FBI would include him in their investigation, claiming this was just another instance of the government trying to extend their wily grasp into the affairs of the church. He actually said wily grasp, which of course made him look guiltier. Peter arranged with Arthur Dingle, the most understanding store owner in the city of Chicago, to take a few days off, so Wednesday morning we rode the L downtown to the Madison Street stop. "Exactly how are we going to do this?" asked Peter as we walked over to Wabash. "What?" "Well, Agents Henry and Raymond said we're supposed to be looking for someone who isn't what they say they are, right?" "Yeah," I replied. "And they think the office might have been infiltrated by a member of a militia or something." Peter made a noise that sounded something like, "I'm not the one who came up with that," I said. Okay. But like you said, most of the people in this office are gay. So doesn't this come dangerously close to trying to find out who's really gay and who's not?" "Maybe, except in this case it would be the closet breeders who are in trouble. But look, the FBI wants to know if there's anyone who isn't what they seem. Meaning anyone. There are some straight people working for Clark, for Christ's sake. And how exactly are we supposed to find out which is which? Hit on guys until somebody bashes us, or just report the first person who can't recite all the words to Younger Than Springtime? Are you going to be like this all day?" "I just want to repeat for the record that I don't like what we're doing. First of all, it's probably impossible. If somebody's been clever enough to get into the Clark campaign without blowing their cover, I doubt if they'll be stupid enough to slip in front of us. And second, it's probably a wild goose chase anyway. These G-men have come up with some strange ideals in their time, but this one is completely nuts." "Thirdly," I prompted. He stopped suddenly and looked at me gravely. "What if we're wrong? What if we think somebody's suspicious and we're wrong? Do you have any idea how much trouble we could cause somebody if we reported them?" "You mean falsely accuse somebody of being straight?" He gave a little huff of exasperation. "You know what I mean. If we tell Henry and Raymond that we suspect anybody of anything, they're going to be all over whoever it is." I know," I said seriously. "So, we're going to have to be very careful, honey. I know I seemed really excited about getting this case, but I'm not blind. We can't report anything to the FBI unless we're sure of it." "And how are we going to do that?" "I don't know," I said as we started to walk again. "Nose around, keep our eyes and ears open. I think Henry's ideal is stupid, too. What we really need to do is find out if anybody knows about that tape." Nobody said anything about looking for that tape, if there really is one. Somebody has to. The FBI doesn't know about it. We do, and we can't tell them about it, remember? I tried not to sound as if I was enjoying trapping him in his own scruples. He sighed with frustration. If Jody was trying to find dirt on Peterson, she wouldn't have been doing it at the Clark's headquarters, would she? I don't know. Where would you find dirt on a politician? Probably everywhere you look. But that's not the point. I laughed. Well, the thing is, if there is a tape of Peterson doing something scandalous, I would think somebody at Clark's office would know about it. Maybe we find out who has the tape. We can find out who killed Jody. Alex, Peter said warningly, I'm not going to get us into trouble. The new office was in the middle of the block in an older building. That was the color of farina and dotted with soot and grime. Just inside the revolving door, there was a set of newly installed metal detectors, through which you had to pass in order to proceed. Just past the detectors was a guy in a khaki uniform and wearing a holstered gun. Sitting behind a desk and reading the Sun-Times to his right was a huge black building directory with the names of the resident businesses listed in white press on letters. Peter and I stood for a time staring at the board, looking for Clark. It's not here, I said. Can I help you? The guard said without looking up from his reading. We want Charles Clark's office, I said. 5. 5 what? He looked up for the first time. 5th floor. His tone implied I was a half-wit. A sign over the elevators on the left side of the hallway indicated that they were the ones that serviced floors 1 through 20. We got on the first one that opened and went up to the 5th floor. The decor in the hallway was enough to turn an interior decorator's heart to stone. A dark brown, deep piled carpet and walls a sort of vomit tan, painted in thick coats over a layer of wallpaper. We were silent as we went down the hall looking for the office. I felt as if the walls and floor would snap shut on me if I said anything. A piece of computer paper, the kind with perforated edges, was taped to the door at the end of the hall. On it was printed a message informally announcing Charles Clark's campaign headquarters. This is it, said Peter. Happy hunting, I replied as I opened the door. Hold it, a voice commanded as we stepped through the doorway. It came from a guard in a blue uniform, like the guard in the lobby. He had a gun holstered on his right hip, but this one was also carrying a clipboard. The ensemble made him look like an overly strict school principal. Who are you? I'm Alex Reynolds. This is Peter Livesey. His gaze slowly traveled from me to Peter as if he were memorizing our faces. Then he scanned the list on his clipboard and checked off our names. Okay, he said. Despite the age and state of the building, the new office was a definite improvement over the old one. At least it looked like we were working in an office rather than squatting in an abandoned store. In lieu of office furniture, which either hadn't been delivered yet or hadn't even been ordered, several long tables of the church basement variety were set up in the main room. The one along the window served as a makeshift phone bank. Boxes were piled up on the wall to the right, and to the left were 2 doors, side by side, leading to inner offices for Clark and Schuler. The place was swarming with volunteers. The recent bombing seemed to have heightened interest rather than scaring people off. Some of them were manning the phones, which were already ringing at an alarming rate, while others were busy unpacking boxes. Where do we start? Said Peter. I don't know, I replied. I don't know who the new office manager is. I am, said a voice just behind us. We turned around to find Sean Stillman. Instead of the casual clothes he had formerly worn in common with the rest of us, he was now dressed in a new but cheap suit. You've been promoted, I said with a smile. Yeah, I think they asked Mary Lynn Hayden to do it first, just out of respect, but she didn't want to. You don't look too happy about it, he grimaced comically. The last office manager is dead. Point well taken. What do you want us to do? You guys want to work together? We don't need to, I said quickly, figuring that we'd be able to cover more ground separately. Okie dokie, Sean replied. He turned to Peter. Do you know how to do the phones? You mean answer them? Yes. Good then. There's one free over there. He pointed to the table by the windows. Just sit and answer the phone for a while. We're kind of disorganized, this being the first day here and all. So I'll just leave you there for a while. If you get tired or run into any trouble, just jodel. All right, said Peter. He added, see you later, to me as he went to the phones. Now you, Sean said, putting an index finger to his chin and pursing his lips. You work with those guys over there, would you? He indicated a table by the wall, where a couple of guys were unloading the contents of one of the boxes. My heart sank. Flyers? Yeah, isn't it awful, said Sean. All that work we did over at Lincoln and the whole mailing. Everything was blown sky high. We had to start all over again. Oh, Jesus! I moaned. Yeah, but it can't be helped. That mailing is for the primary, so we've got to get it all out before next Tuesday. We had all the stuff sent up from Springfield. I sighed heavily. Are you sure we can't use a mailing service? He smiled. After Clark wins the primary, we'll have all the money we need. You know how the Democratic Party is. They might not agree with everything Clark stands for, and they may not exactly be supporting him now. But the minute he's the official candidate, that'll be all she wrote. They'd back an axe-murderer if they thought he could win against a Republican. I was momentarily taken aback by this. I hadn't gotten to talk to Sean much during our mutual volunteering, but he'd always seemed very gung-ho for Clark. Now he sounded almost mercenary. Although what he just said wasn't a direct aspersion on the candidate, it certainly could be construed as a very negative assessment of our party. And it was just the type of thing Agents Henry and Raymond had told us to listen for. As I walked over the work area, I found myself shaking my head with disgust at my own thoughts. This was the very reason Peter hated this assignment so much. It was so insidious. What John had said was no different from anything any of us, myself included, had said about both parties. I wondered how I was going to be able to report anything at all to our contacts. Even though I might not have been happy to be stuffing envelopes again, it suited the needs of our investigations perfectly. I was joined at the table by Joe Gardner and Mickey Downs. Joe was about as ordinary as his name. He had a sharply receding hairline, perpetually arched brows, and shoe-button eyes, all of which together gave him the appearance of a light bulb with pupils. He wore an old blue shirt and dull brown pants. If Peter was right, and we were meant to find out who was gay and who wasn't, Joe's attire was one strike against him. The only thing that would have made Mickey a candidate for the part of militia mole was his blonde crew cut. It would have taken lead weights to get his feet to touch the ground. He was handsome in a 70s disco queen sort of way. His body was slight and taut and wrapped in a tight violet tank top, and even tighter denim jeans. On his feet was a pair of black sneakers with Winnie the Pooh laces. Honestly, said Mickey, once we'd settled into work, I thought we'd finish this up at the old place. He made it sound like it had been years since we were at the former office. I know what you mean, I said. I have paper cuts all over my fingers. Ew! He pursed his entire face. If I start getting paper cuts, I'm going to have to take to my bed. Joe frowned and said nothing. I can't believe we have to do this thing all over again, I continued, angling to draw out my two companions. God, and we were almost finished with it before the office blew up. Oh, well, Mickey said with a dramatic sigh. A woman's work is never done. Apparently he was already getting tired of the conversation. I suppose it's all worth it if we can get Clark elected. I tried to sound naively enthusiastic. From the curious look I got from Joe, I had a feeling I sounded exactly like I was trying to pump them for the FBI. Do you really think he has a chance of winning? Joe asked. I blinked. Sure, why not? Well, I got this the other day in the mail. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a pamphlet that had been folded several times, and handed it over to me. I opened it, and blazoned across the top in red letters was, Is this who you want representing you in the Senate? Beneath the startling headline was a picture of a drag queen atop a float. He was in a sequined dress and feathered boa, and leering directly at the camera with his tongue hanging way out. It looked like it had been taken at one of the pride parades. "Oh, I know her," said Mickey, glancing at the picture. "She's a tramp." "It's pretty effective, don't you think?" said Joe, ignoring him. "It makes gay people look like a bunch of freaks." "Gay people? Not us," I thought. "It makes me so mad when I see stuff like this," he said as he took the pamphlet from me and stuck it back into his pocket. "It makes me think that gay people are their own worst enemies." "You really think so?" I said with interest. "I mean, normal people look at a picture like that and it makes them sick." "Normal people?" I repeated silently. "I've done drag," Mickey said. He made a little meow at Joe and, imitating a hygiene commercial, said, "It made me feel soft and feminine." And Joe looked over at me and rolled his eyes. "Anyway," he said, "I know gay people want to get Clark elected, but if they don't stay out of the limelight, they're going to end up shooting themselves in the foot." The way he put this pushed me past being suspicious. I was starting to get angry. "Excuse me for asking this," I said, "but are you gay?" Apparently, I said this loud enough for Peter to hear it over at the phone table. He looked up with amazement. Joe's mouth dropped open and his skin grew white. "Of course I am. Why would you ask something like that?" "Because you keep saying gay people do this and gay people do that as if you aren't one of us." He looked down at the table and his face suddenly flushed bright crimson. "I'm sorry. No need to bite my head off. It's just a way of talking." It was then that the door popped open and John Schuler entered, followed closely by Charles Clark and his wife, Wendy. "Hello, everybody," called out the candidate with a wave. He turned to his wife with elaborate deference and said, "Wendy, this is the new office. What do you think?" Wendy Clark smiled and shook her head as if she were awestruck. She clapped her hands under her chin. "I think it's just wonderful." There was an audible sigh of relief among the workers, which made me wonder if someone had actually been worried about what the candidate's wife thought of the office. John Schuler went back to his new private office, and Clark moved to follow, but paused just long enough to give Wendy a discreet peck on the forehead. Wendy shrugged at the volunteers and said, "I'm going shopping. Keep up the good work, everyone. Goodbye." "Goodbye," we said in chorus. We sounded like the partygoers wishing a good night to the Von Trapp family children. Sure that "So long, farewell" sung of these were cute and all, but I always felt that the guests must have been awfully glad to see the retreating backsides of those insipid little brats. Wendy Clark left the office, and everyone went back to what they'd been doing. "Jesus Christ," Mickey exclaimed in a delighted whisper as we resumed our envelope stuffing. "Isn't that Schuler guy a fox?" John Schuler? I was a bit perplexed, mainly because Schuler seemed awfully straight-laced to be capturing Mickey's interest. "Is he gay?" "Who cares? I like to look at him." "Schuler's not gay," Joe interjected with a force that was uncalled for. He glanced at Mickey with something bordering on contempt. "How do you know?" I asked. "He's just not," Joe said defensively. "That's not what I hear," Mickey said with a gossipy little pucker of his lips. "I hear that our Johnny has a past." "He's married," Joe exclaimed. "That doesn't mean he doesn't have a past," Mickey needled. "Why does everybody have to be gay?" "As far as I know, they don't," I said. "Don't you think he's handsome?" Mickey asked Joe. "Not really." I seized this as a golden opportunity to get some information. "Oh, are you going with someone?" I asked, figuring I could use his lack of attraction to the campaign manager, who was pretty attractive, as an excuse. "No, I don't have anyone right now," he replied sullenly. I made a mental note of that and turned to Mickey. "What about you?" "Always on the prowl," he said with a wicked smile. I looked around the room for a moment. "What about Sean Stillman?" "What about him?" "Do you think he's handsome?" Sean was across the room talking to one of the volunteers. And Mickey peered over at him as if assessing him for the first time. I wouldn't kick him out of my bed as long as he kept his mouth shut. I mean, as long as he didn't talk. He's way too dull. What do you mean? Haven't you talked to him since his promotion? He's way full of himself. I only talked to him for a minute. He seemed all right, just a little frazzled. Don't let the frazzled bit fool you. Oh, yeah, he's pretending to be in over his head, but that's just an act. I knew Sean from the clubs long before this, and he's so full of himself he would never, ever say he was overwhelmed if he really meant it. He was probably angling for that job all along. Why would he want a high-pressure volunteer job, I asked. A volunteer job? Mickey squinched his face up so tightly he looked like the butt end of a balloon. What volunteer job? Office manager is one of the few paying positions here. Do you think the late and unlimited Jody Lynn Hayden was doing this out of the goodness of that lump of coal in the center of her chest? Now, this was a wrinkle I hadn't thought of. That someone might have actually wanted Jody out of the way to get her job. I found myself mentally shaking my head. It couldn't pay that much, but I remembered the way Sean had seemed to watch Jody at the old office. Did Sean ever say anything about wanting this job? I asked. Mickey let out a bored sigh. No, but you can bet he wanted it. Joe said, sounds like when you knew him at the clubs, he turned you down. I never asked, Mickey said, though he turned a bit pink. Besides, Shawnee doesn't fool around. He's already taken. He is, I said. Mickey nodded. He has a boyfriend. He's mentioned him from time to time. But you never met him. Mm-mm, he smiled coldly. Why? Are you interested? Good grief, no, I said, hoping to God that I hadn't appeared too nosy. You see that guy out there? The one on the phone by the end of the table? The guy you came in with. That's my husband, Peter. Wow. Mickey said, echoing my sentiments exactly. I can see why you wouldn't be looking. Joe glanced over at Peter, then at me, as if he was trying to picture us together. I don't mean in the biblical sense, then lowered his eyes again. Peter and I are so happily married, we even discussed ourselves. I was just asking about Sean because I don't know anybody here very well. I mean, any of the people here today. Our friends Joe and Sheila volunteer when they can, but they're the only ones we're really close to. Oh, Mickey replied, barely listening. He had paused in his stuffing and was still looking over at Peter. How long have the two of you been together? About 8 years now. He sighed deeply and shoved a flyer into an envelope. I wish I could find something like that, but the only thing I meet at the bars are trogs, alcoholics, and assholes. He tossed the envelope into the done box, and then leaned over to me and whispered, If you want to know the truth, that's why I decided to volunteer. I couldn't help smiling. To meet guys, he shrugged. Ann Lander says it's the best way. The two of us continued to chat as we worked, while Joe remained on the periphery of the conversation. He didn't seem overly fond of Mickey, which I chalked up to a general prejudice against the lighter of our brethren, although I hadn't made any points with Joe either. If I'd wanted to draw him out, I never should have been so direct, no matter how interesting I found the reaction. Mickey went on at length about the other men who were working in the office. He was one of those guys who was overly well-versed in the sex lives of almost everyone around him. But I listened and didn't have to feign interest, since all of it, assuming it was true, was useful to our purpose. Although things were relatively peaceful at our table, the office itself was in a steady state of bustle. Delivery men were in and out, and new volunteers arrived as others left, and the phones rang constantly, which I imagined was keeping Peter from doing any sleuthing at all. Even with the number of volunteers there that day, I hardly recognized any from the old office. Most of them were new faces, presumably recruited by Sean Stillman. Sean stopped by our table a couple of times to exhort us to work faster. He promised that some more help would be coming in the afternoon, but he didn't sound confident when he said it. He was so busy with his new job and trying to get the office together that it was impossible to get him to stay and talk. So I made another mental note that we'd have to try to discreetly tackle him some other time. Can I have your attention, please? John Schuler announced loudly. I had noticed him coming out of his office. He seemed to suddenly materialize in the center of the room like a vampire congealing from vapor. I welcomed the chance to get to see in action the man whose only qualification for the job in Jody's assessment was that he was a leech. As he spoke, he seemed confident enough, but he held a notepad in his palm and looked down at it repeatedly like a performer who hasn't quite mastered his lines yet. Charlie and I would like to thank you all for the hard and very necessary work you're doing. We realize that the place is a bit disorganized today. Here he smiled like a politician. And that's no reflection on Sean Stillman, who's done a bang-up job of getting this place together in record time. And there was a smattering of applause for Sean, who I swear to God was trying to blush. He wasn't successful. Schuler continued. Anyway, we know it's a bit disorganized right now, but Sean and the rest of the staff are working very, very hard to get this place together as quickly as possible. We want you to know that we thank you for your patience, your hard work, and your support. Why don't you give yourselves a hand? He began clapping lightly, and there was another smattering of applause. Now, there are a few things we need to tell you about. First, of course, you all know about the terrible tragedy that necessitated our move to these new digs, and that there was a death involved. We need to remember Jody Lynn Hayden as a fine person, a woman of great conviction, and a tireless worker for her cause. He didn't mention her being liked by anyone. There will be a memorial service for her on Sunday at the Waverly Chapel. The address and time will be posted on the bulletin board. All are invited to attend. Now, because of the tragedy, the police will probably be in and out of here for a while. So I don't want any of you to be bothered by this. He manufactured another smile, this time to let us know that the matter wasn't something that needed to be taken seriously. On a happier note, I'd like to remind you all that there will be a fundraiser held on Friday night at the home of a gentleman named Tony Milano. I lowered my eyes and smiled. Peter and I knew Tony. It didn't surprise me that Schuler stumbled over his name. Mr. Milano has generously offered to sponsor this event to help raise money for this office, and we're very grateful. Unfortunately, Charlie and I will not be able to attend, but we'd like as many of you to be there as possible. I'm sure you'll all enjoy yourselves. It seemed to me that Clark and Schuler were distancing themselves from the Milano event in the nicest possible way, but that didn't surprise me either. There was a pause, then he thanked us all for listening and went back into the office. My first impression of Schuler held through to the end of his presentation. He never ceased glancing at his notebook, and I got the feeling that even if he'd had his lines down cold, an interruption from the audience would have sent him spinning. Peter and I had agreed beforehand that we would leave the office at 2 o'clock, which we did with great relief. After 6 hours of stuffing envelopes, I was feeling sadly arthritic, and Peter said he'd developed a permanent crick in his neck from holding the phone between his ear and shoulder. Looks like it's time to hand out the rocking chairs, I said. How are the phones? It seems this open attack on Clark has caused a groundswell of support. He was already popular. This goes beyond that. Most of the calls I took today were from people who said they'd been undecided on how to vote before, but after the bombing they decided to go for Clark. If anything, the attack has helped his campaign. Makes you wonder if he did it himself. Peter looked at me out of the corner of his eye. Don't even say that. Just pointing out the obvious. Did you find out anything about anyone? He shook his head. Not much. I didn't have much time in between calls. And the only people sitting close enough to me to talk to were Richard Birch and Annie Watson. But that's good, I said. Both of them worked in the old office. Well, Richard kept talking about a guy named Jerry. I never did find out whether or not that was his boyfriend. He seems nice enough, but he never once said a word about politics unless he was answering the phone. Annie didn't talk about much of anything. She seemed distracted. What? Annie had a key to the old office. She was the one who opened up the day Jody and Mary were late. When they got that threatening phone call. So what? So she could easily have planted the bomb. Alex, anybody could have done that. Remember? Henry said they had no way of knowing whether or not the place was broken into. I sighed. I guess it didn't matter if whoever it was broke a lock or a window to get in if the whole place was going to be rubble. Did you do any better than I did? Asked Peter. Sean Stillman has a boyfriend, but I don't know who it is. Mickey Downs doesn't have a boyfriend, but wants one. He's a barfly. He gets around quite a bit and knew a lot about the other guys in the office. He knows a lot less about the women for obvious reasons. And Joe Gardner doesn't have a boyfriend and doesn't sound like he wants one, which is fortunate because he has the personality of a castrated rhino. But who knows? Maybe he could find another political fag with no taste in clothes. I gave him a rundown of everything else I'd heard, then ended with, and by the way, that Jerry, that Richard Birch mentioned, is his boyfriend. But they have an open relationship, so they sleep around with everyone they can find. When I was finished, I found Peter staring at me with his mouth hanging open. What? I asked. In one morning you found out about the sex lives of almost everyone working there today? I shrugged. I didn't have anything else to do, and Mickey likes to talk. I don't know if any of it is true. Did I hear you ask Joe Gardner, point blank, if he was gay? Yeah, but I had a good reason for it. You mean other than the obvious? I laughed. No, I haven't lost my mind. He kept talking about gay people in the third person. It started to get on my nerves. I know we're supposed to be discreet, but it seemed like an appropriate question at the time. How did he react? He went into a sulk, as Mother would say. There was a beat, then Peter said, So you think he's suspicious? You think he might be lying about who he is? I shrugged. Either that, or he hasn't gotten laid in a long time. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Red Line train, the noise of which would have drowned out the landing of a jumbo jet. The door slid open and we got in. Once we were seated, I heaved a frustrated sigh. What's wrong? Peter asked. You're right about this case. What they've asked us to do is impossible. Only the FBI would think we could nose around and figure out if anyone is lying about who they are. I mean, of course, Joe sounds suspicious when we're looking for something that sounds suspicious, but nothing he said was any different than anything half a dozen of our friends would have said. And Mickey sounds as gay as a floral arrangement. But if someone was trying to pass as a fag, isn't that exactly what they do? That's what I've been saying from the start, honey. I mean, what do we have? We haven't found anything concrete. All we've got is gossip. I was silent for a moment, then added, I really think we need to find out about that tape. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Peter's lips curl. How exactly would we go about doing that? I thought about this for a minute, then an idea hit me. Maybe we can make gossip work to our advantage. Peter rolled his eyes. What? I know I'm in trouble when you get like this, he said, and I haven't forgotten that Russian business. I don't want to end up stripped naked and strapped to a bed again. I clucked my tongue. There go my plans for the evening. We got home about 3 o'clock and found a note from Mother saying that she'd already left for the evening. The note assured us that she was busy trying to find Simon out, and I shuddered to think what she meant by that. She was still in bed when we left for Clark's office the next morning. Thursday, the activity at the office increased sharply. Apparently, Sean Stillman was quite serious about his job, and the fact that we needed to get the mailing out before Thursday's primary. He'd managed to get even more volunteers in to help. This seriousness reminded me of what Mickey told me. I still found it difficult to believe that anyone would kill to get an office job, no matter whose office that might be in. And to try to get it by destroying the office where you want to work seemed, well, counterproductive. Anyway, several additional tables had been set up, and a dozen or more people were madly stuffing envelopes with unbridled exuberance. The candidate and his campaign manager didn't appear that day. Clark's schedule was filled with last-minute baby and butt-kissing. Peter was once again assigned to the phones, a testament to Sean's having recognized my husband's undying patience, and I was once again relegated to stuffing. With the flurry of excitement and the elevated level of chatter going on, I figured it would be easy to put my plan into action. I found out very quickly that this new track was doomed to derail. I decided to start with Mickey, who had proven a font of information, no matter how spurious it might be the day before. I managed to wedge myself in between him and a young woman with black bobbed hair who looked like she had just stepped out of Enchanted April. Mickey greeted me happily and then launched into a continuation of yesterday's topic. Who was sleeping with whom? When he paused for a breath, I seized the opportunity. You know what I heard? I said. Mickey eyed me attentively. He was very eager to add to his repertoire. What? You know Fritz Peterson, the Republican candidate? Yeah. I leaned closer to him. I heard that there's a big scandal involving him, that the Republicans are desperate to keep silent. His eyes widened. Really? What is it? I blinked. I'd been hoping he would wave me off and tell me it was old news. Then tell me what it was. I don't know, I said, hoping I sounded believable. But I hear whatever it is, it was caught on tape. Really? Mickey replied with a wicked smile. I can just imagine. What? He suddenly looked confused. Whatever it is, I can just imagine. I tried a different line. Have you ever heard anything about Peterson? Just that he's a big old phobe and a Bible thumper. Isn't that a funny expression? It always makes me think of Bambi. Anyway, you just know that whatever there is on Peterson has to be juicy because when thumpers fall, they fall the hardest. I sighed inwardly. This wasn't going to get me anywhere. Next, I tried Joe Gardner. He had situated himself at one of the other tables. I imagined to try to be as far away from Mickey as he could. The day before, Joe had struck me as the type of person who, although he might be gay, dislikes the more effeminate of our species. However, he could just as easily have been trying to avoid me, since I'd sounded so antagonistic toward him earlier. When I saw him go over to get a new box of flyers from the pile by the wall, I made my move. Here, I'll help you, I said. I don't need help, he replied. I ignored him and carried the other side of the box anyway, which was unnecessary, and made carrying it more awkward than if I just let him do it himself. He shot a glance at me over the top of the box as if he was thinking the very thing. We placed the box on the end of the table where he'd been working, and I broached the subject of Fritz Peterson's veracity. Joe stopped in the act of pulling a handful of flyers from the box and said, A scandal? Really? What? I don't know exactly, I said, more smoothly now that I was somewhat prepared for this response. This is just something I've been hearing lately, and that whatever it is, it was caught on tape. He resumed unpacking with a shake of his head. It doesn't surprise me. He's probably gay. Why do you say that? Because there's a question about his morals? I wished I could take the indignation out of my tone, but the way this guy put things really ticked me off. No, Joe said, without batting an eye, because he's such an outrageous homophobe. You know as well as I do that gay people are the worst homophobes. Even though what he was saying made me really angry, I couldn't disagree. Internalized homophobia is a big problem, but I still hated the way he said it, and the fact that he persisted in referring to us in the third person. You don't like gay people, do you? I said. He paused again with a handful of flyers. No, I don't. They're irritating. They're either political and humorless, or they're so damn flighty they can't be serious about anything. After a beat, I said, what was that you were saying about gay people being homophobic? He grunted. You asked, and you know it's true. Well, if you feel that way, why the hell are you supporting Clark? Because I like his platform. I agree with him on the issues. You mean because he's pro-gay? He sighed with disgust. Being pro-gay isn't his only issue. It's our only issue. I smiled despite myself. I'm glad to hear you say it. He looked totally baffled. What? Our? Work was interrupted at noon when the office received the first bomb threat since moving. Either the threateners were getting lax or the increased security was daunting them. Unlike at the old office, the minute this threat was received, the building was evacuated. We were on the sidewalk on Wabash amid people from the other offices, all of whom seemed to appreciate the interruption. We were also surrounded by news crews. Sean spent his time making the rounds of the volunteers. When he got to us, he said, "Do not under any circumstances talk to anyone from the media." "We weren't planning to," said Peter. Sean looked up at the building. "I think I managed that really well." "Managed what?" I asked. "The evacuation of our office. Everyone got down the stairs in an orderly fashion without a single hitch." I was a bit surprised to hear him say this, since nothing had been required of him. When the threat was announced, we all just left the office. There might have been a bit more anxiety about it than there would have been a week ago, but it wasn't exactly a stampede. "Jody couldn't have done it as well. She never evacuated the office," he added. "The FBI told Jody that the bomb threats weren't serious," I said. He snorted. "I'll bet they feel different now." He bustled away from us to cosset another group of volunteers. "I didn't like the sound of that," I said to Peter. "Neither did I," he replied, although he sounded as if his reasons were different than mine. We were on the street for almost an hour while the bomb squad was called in and searched the building. When the place was pronounced clear, we went back up to our slightly shabby office with a profound sense of anticlimax. Not that anyone wanted the place to explode, at least nobody that was in it. Peter and I came away from the office that afternoon tired and frustrated. That is to say, he was tired and I was frustrated. When we got home, we found Mother doing the preliminary preparations for dinner. "What are you doing here?" I asked unceremoniously. "Darling, I live here," she replied with that Simon-induced lilt. "I mean, aren't you going out tonight? Don't tell me you've finally broken little Simon's heart." "Not at all," she said with a flip of her hand. "But tonight is one of the few classes he actually needs to attend, so you have me for the duration of the evening." "I'm glad to hear it. It will give you a chance to fill me in on how the investigation is going." I put a hand to my chest. "I didn't know you cared." "Alex, you really are being tiresome." I sighed heavily. "I know, I'm sorry, but while you've been doing Cinderella and Endless Ball, our investigation has been going nowhere. I must have broached the subject of that videotape with a dozen people today, and all anyone had to say was, 'I'm not surprised at the idea of Peterson being involved in a scandal.'" "The tape," Mother said incredulously. "The one Mary Lynn Hayden told us about. The one that was used to get Jody to the office when it blew up." "I know which tape," she said with elaborate patience. "I thought you were supposed to be trying to find out if somebody's not on the up and up. We gave that up as a bad job, and there's no way we can do that just by listening to people." "He gave that up," Peter corrected. "I never thought it would work." "You mean you've been asking about the tape? The one that got Jody killed? Have you gone completely mad?" She glanced over at Peter as if I'd been left in his care in her absence, and he'd been found wanting. "You see what happens when I leave you on your own." "I didn't cause any trouble," I said. "Nobody there knew anything about the tape. If somebody had heard of it, I'm sure they would have said something. God knows the place is a hotbed of gossip." "I know what you think you were thinking, darling, but you weren't thinking. If someone used that tape to lure Jody to her death, the last thing they'd do is volunteer any knowledge of it." "But it might not have been used as a lure. Someone might really have wanted to give some evidence to her. Suppose a third party found out about it and blew them both up. We still don't know if there was more than one person there at the time." Mother stared at me for a moment, sucking in her lips. "The result is still the same. Whether Jody was lured there to be blown up or she was meeting someone there and they were both blown up, the person who did it knows about the tape." "I think the two of you are missing something," Peter said after clearing his throat. "There may not be a tape at all." "What?" Mother and I exclaimed in familial unison. He shrugged. "The tape could have been just a lure." I could feel myself deflating. I hadn't thought of that, and he was right. If Jody was the target, it would have been the easiest way to get her low. There didn't really have to be a tape at all. "If that's the case," said Mother, "it's even worse. If somebody made up the business about the tape, then it looks even worse if you know about it. Asking around about that tape has put you in a very dangerous position." "I didn't ask around about it," I said nasally. "I only said I heard there was one." "And everybody said they hadn't heard of such a thing," said Mother. "Right. There you have it! What do I have? Everyone said they didn't know about it, but somebody must, don't you see? God, Peter groaned. I was getting irritated, as I always do, when it seems I'm the last to catch on. Mother leveled her eyes at me. If nobody else knows about the tape, that leaves only the person who planted the bomb. Then the person is now aware that you know something you shouldn't. Oh, but it might not have been somebody from the office. Even Agents Henry and Raymond said they thought this was a long shot. They didn't know the real reason Jody was at the office. Did they? Said Mother. But who else would she have agreed to meet? There at 5 in the morning. Surely not a complete stranger. That still doesn't have to have been someone from the office. Then why would he ask her to go there? Why not on neutral ground somewhere? I couldn't answer that. Alex, the most likely person to be claiming to have found dirt on Fritz Peterson, would be someone connected to Mr. Clark's campaign. Don't you see? Nobody else would have a reason for it. I sank onto one of the kitchen chairs. But whoever it is might not have been there today. It doesn't matter. You started the ball rolling. And if the bomber really is in that office, he'll find out. People will know about it. It's bound to get back to him. Honestly, Alex, here I am in the midst of being courted. I only have just so much time with Simon as it is, and I'm going to have to put everything aside and try to keep you from getting killed again. You're being courted. She placed her hands firmly on her hips. Is that all you got out of that sentence? She shook her head briskly and made a bring noise with her lips, then threw up her hands and left the room. I have to hand it to you, honey, Peter said. It's been a hell of a long time since you got your mother so flummoxed she couldn't speak. After dinner, I made my first report to Henry. That is to say, I reported that I had nothing to report. I wasn't about to tell him my suspicions of Joe Gardner, if you could even call them that. And Peter and I had already agreed that we wouldn't tell him about the tape. I thought that after what Mother had said, Peter might be in favor of letting the FBI know about it. But he was still suffering an attack of conscience over the way we'd come by the information. And just for the record, so was I. So once I'd filtered out everything I couldn't tell Henry, there was really nothing left. Then I asked him if they'd learned anything. Henry said that they hadn't gotten any leads as to the bomber and that they'd already checked all the threats. Both those phoned into the office and the ones made to Jody's home. And without exception, they'd been made from payphones. As far as identifying the person who died in the bombing, they'd typed blood found at the scene and it matched Jody's. We haven't found evidence of anyone else being there, he added. So it looks like we're safe in assuming it was Jody Lynn Hayden who was killed and that she was alone. Isn't there any way to make sure it was her? How about DNA testing? He sighed. There's nothing to test it against. It's not like she left children anywhere, did she? When Peter and I went to bed that night, I lay awake for quite a while, trying to convince myself that I'd taken the only road possible by pursuing the tape. But I had the disquieting feeling that Mother was right. I'd probably landed us in the soup again. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.